Skull. Of course it's Skull. It's got ice in it. As Dean Martin used to say. Ryan Coke. And don't worry, unlike Dean Martin, I don't ever have any intentions of coming to my readings partially cut. Although, the thought has occurred to me. Anyways, welcome on this bright and cheerful Tuesday. First things first, let me turn off the music. There we go. Second things second, let me bring down the video a little bit. That's a little bit better. All right. Well, I hope everybody's feeling fine today. And apologies for being really late this particular week. But there were so many things was happening in my life. For instance, on Saturday, I had to go to the church where I go to. It's Guardian Angels. I'm a Protestant. It's a Roman Catholic church. And part of a cleanup workup crew. And you'll see the picture. I'm going to superimpose it on the video later on when I'm doing the editing. So you'll see all the people involved in the cleanup. And on Sunday was the official consecration of the Guardian Angels Parish Church with some cardinal, I forget his name. Anyways, he was there doing the officiating, and they expected about 1,500 people, like over 2,000 people showed up. And I had to work Saturday evening because I do the Hollywood moving trucks from the studios to where they're going to do the shoot and back and forth. So I was busy, and then Monday I got caught up. I was doing some of the video editing and picture editing of the pictures I took on the during the consecration, and also excuse me, but my son was coming to visit. He lives in Spain, so he was dropping by. And of course, there was the election debate last night, and so I've been really on top of that and keeping up with it. So all in all, I have really good excuses. And if you don't like my excuses, oh well. I still appreciate your attendance, whether, and if I'm late, again, I do apologize, but I have been busy. But I hope you've been busy also. I hope things have been going really well for you. And this week, we will be reading chapter 17. A letter from the Vaniers. Now, as some of you may know, if you've been reading my book or have read my book, that Jackie Vanier is quite the staunch, I would say, zealous Presbyterian Protestant Christian, whereas her husband, Bill Vanier, he's a lapsed Catholic. So obviously, it's important to understand Catholicism in my research, but my fiance is Catholic, so I go to a Roman Catholic church. And I feel just as comfortable there worshiping God as I would in a Presbyterian church, in a Baptist church, even in a Pentecostal church to some extent. But anyways, right now we're going to be reading from ABAJAM Chronicles. And again, thank you for coming. First, we'll start off with the last paragraph of chapter 16. So we have an idea of where we left off. Don't you know, that's why I'm going through the trouble of recording everything in chronological order. Maybe it'll provide some clues or answers. Remember that letter you wrote to Bernie and me about 9 years ago? I think that will be my next segue. This is when Albert and Jackie were having a little get-together in his office concerning some of the revelations of the past as he's trying to determine what brought all this about. So, before we go any further, another swig of my Ryan Coke. Excuse me. Anyways, chapter 17. It actually didn't take much effort to emerge from our trance-like state of mind because we'd only been engaged in it for a brief time. It also helped that Jackie had more important priorities on her mind, the care of Frank for one, and her concern for Steve the other. These factors enabled her to break the mental bond between us that might have held someone else who had little or no other pressing engagements. That had to have been one of the strangest experiences I've ever had, remarked Jackie. I read about people who have had out-of-body experiences, and I'd have to describe what I experienced to be somewhat similar to the stories I heard. And as odd as this may sound, after reliving that dreadful episode with you as my witness, I feel a great burden of guilt has been lifted off my shoulders. I know exactly what you mean, I confessed. Been there and done it, now several times. It is remarkably cathartic and spiritually enlightening. And in your case, as you well know, what does the Bible say about confessing your sins one to another and its accompanying benefits? And yeah, there are benefits to that. Even with all that's happened, she asked me warily, you still believe in God and the Bible, Al? Right now I'm having an extremely difficult time reconciling our traveling to this other time or dimension, the existence of aliens, and my belief in God, not to mention the teachings of the Bible. There is nothing in the whole Bible that I can find to justify both realities. I sensed her uncertainty was creating a crisis of faith for her and causing her great consternation. I dealt with my own personal crisis of faith years ago and on several other occasions. I figure it only happens once in your lifetime. You're not really battling the devil. I figure if it only happens once in your lifetime, you're not really battling the devil. Our recent events were just one more hurdle for me to clear in life's race, and I suspect there will be a few more before the finish line. Fortunately, I had some education in theology, along with some lay training when I was a young man, and seriously considered becoming a missionary. I learned early on, if you fight with the devil, you will get burned. And that meant making sure I always had on hand appropriate protection, both spiritual and otherwise, as well as the right burn ointments, so to speak. I deliberately exposed myself to numerous elements of various Christian teaching, thought, philosophy, and apologetics. Why, there are some churches and Christian circles that would label me a borderline heretic. That's one cross I'll gladly bear if it disassociates me from the extreme fundamentalists. So why can't you come to terms with the knowledge of the existence of both? I challenged her. God never intended for the Bible to provide answers to every question of our existence, nor was it written to explain all the riddles of the universe. Let me share something with you. I once heard an interview conducted on an American radio station called NPR with one of the top administrators of the SETI, S-E-T-I program. The acronym, by the way, stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Anyway, it turns out he's a Christian. He confided to the host that searching for aliens didn't conflict with his faith, nor would finding any undermine his belief in God. He actually stated that his God was big enough to create life on more than one little planet. Then there's that Nobel laureate scientist who headed up the Human Genome Project. I've heard him interviewed on a few occasions. He too is a Christian. Both these men might not be what you'd consider fundamentalist Christians, but their convictions and faith in the supreme intelligence of God is just as viable as yours and mine. These two gentlemen and many other scientists all believe in the existence of God, but will also readily admit they don't have all the answers to some of the apparent conflicts that they experience in their specific fields of science. Jackie, I sincerely hope not, but if we're stuck here any length of time, do yourself a favor and check out my library's collection of books, tapes, CDs, and DVDs. And on that note, I'm going to pause. Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is chapter 17. As I said to Jackie, and so I'm going to show all of you my readers, that, in my past I have studied theology. Now here's an idea. Unger's Bible Dictionary, Erdman's Handbook to the Bible, an introduction to the Old Testament prophets, a survey of Israel's history, the Layman's Parallel Bible, Portraits of Christ in Genesis, mythology, the Critics Ask, there's a Bible, the Bible and Archaeology, Thomas Cahill, Desire of the Everlasting Hills, and then there's The Battle for God by Karen Armstrong. Of course, there's a lot of historical books that I have down here. And a lot of mess too. Here you have the Noble Quran, Noah's Ark, and there's a book by Charlton Heston. Here we have Young's Analytical Concordance to the Bible, as well as the Septuagint. Now, the Septuagint was basically during the time of Alexander, when the Jews were in exile, and he was ruling over them. And he was Greek, and he had them translate the Old Testament, 500 of them, supposedly. That's where Septuagint comes from Hebrew into Greek. So we also have The Kingdom of the Cults, and you have various other sermons in solitary confinement, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Then we have Answers to Moscow's Bible. And anyways, I have so many other books that I use for reference, as well as history and cooking books and art of blacksmithing. As you can see, I have a reasonably good library of various books to read from. Now, let's go back to my reading of chapter 17. Hello. This is chapter 17. As I said to Jackie, and so I'm going to show all of you, my readers, that, in my past I have studied theology. Now, here's an idea. Unger's Bible Dictionary, Erdman's Handbook to the Bible, an introduction to the Old Testament prophets, a survey of Israel's history, the Layman's Parallel Bible, Portraits of Christ in Genesis, mythology, The Critics Ask, there's a Bible, the Bible in Archaeology, Thomas Cahill, Desire of the Everlasting Hills, and then there's The Battle for God by Karen Armstrong. Of course, there's a lot of historical books that I have down here, and a lot of mess too. Here you have the Noble Quran, Noah's Ark, and there's a book by Charlton Heston. Here we have Young's Analytical Concordance to the Bible, as well as the Septuagint. Now, the Septuagint was basically during the time of Alexander, when the Jews were in exile, and he was ruling over them. And he was Greek, and he had them translate the Old Testament, 500 of them, supposedly. That's where Septuagint comes from Hebrew into Greek. So we also have The Kingdom of the Cults, and you have various other sermons in solitary confinement, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Then we have Answers to Moscow's Bible. And anyways, I have so many other books that I use for reference, as well as history and cooking books and art of blacksmithing. As you can see, I have a reasonably good library of various books to read from. Now, let's go back to my reading of chapter 17. Anyway, so let's go back to my reading of chapter 17. I'll put my phone down and I'll edit all that out afterwards. Anyways, where was I? Okay. So, my collection may not give you all the answers you desire, but it'll provide you the tools to re-examine the questions. You just may be pleasantly surprised at the answers you will come up with once you know what questions you really need to ask. She went over to my bookcase and, walking sideways from left to right, perused my entire collection with more than a cursory glance. And for the record, I added, a significant number of those educational studies, DVDs, are Bernie's, if you need to know more about them. Jackie appeared to be thoroughly impressed and thanked me for the words of encouragement and the access to my library. She then left me to check up on Frank. And yeah, there's I had some CDs laying around. The great courses. You can get some really, really good courses with books along with DVDs, and but I have some of those. So I followed her to the door, stuck my head out into the hall, and shouted up to the kitchen. It was everyone's favorite place to congregate since we'd arrived here. Good Lord, this day is starting to sound more and more like I'm in a church. Come to think of it, I wish I were. Are Jason and Steve and Tanya back from their expedition? I inquired. It was Allison who responded to me that they hadn't returned yet. I instructed her to send them to my room as soon as they got back and not to worry about disturbing me. I would just be working on my project, which I assumed everyone knew about by now. I proceeded over to my filing cabinet and opened the second drawer from the top. That's where I kept all my letters and printed copies of my emails. I've always believed if it weren't for written letters, we'd know so little about many of the great historical figures their habits, lives, families, and culture. So I tend to save every piece of correspondence from all my family and friends, past and present, just in case I too became important someday. Ha ha. And now, here I am. I found the Vaniers letter, still in its original envelope, stuffed in a corresponding file folder. The letter was dated July 1st, 1999. I sat back at my computer and reread the letter so as to know how to proceed with the next segment of my chronicle. Bringing up this letter is a little premature considering the events that transpired after getting home with the modules and then our family visit to the Vaniers for Thanksgiving that October. But in order to remain consistent, what with Jackie's unscheduled visit and contribution just now, I figured I'll touch on that sequence of events immediately following this segment. Here we have, it's in italics, ... In no time, I found myself stepping through the front entrance of our townhouse in the neighborhood of Stanley Park in Kitchener, sipping on a coffee I had just picked up at the nearby Timmy's. I had been gone over 12 days. I had taken a less than trailer load, or an LTL, out to California via Denver, and then off to Las Vegas. I heard about the letter while catching up on my hours of service in Las Vegas. I wouldn't get to read it for 5 or 6 days. Bernie was not about to divulge any part of the letter to me over the phone. She felt I'd appreciate the significance of the letter more if I read it for myself. Now, 2 years and 9 months had passed since that eventful Thanksgiving visit with the Vaniers. Up until now, we had heard nothing from them. Even the boys, regrettably, hadn't remained in touch. Again, it is one of those unfortunate consequences of moving a great distance away. Most friendships tend to drift apart over time. Like anything, friendships need to be maintained through constant communication, visits, sharing activities, and above all, empathy. But there it was on the coffee table, open and waiting for me to get home to read it. A letter from Jackie and Bill. Bernie was almost beside herself when she informed me during our last phone conversation about having received this unexpected letter from the Vaniers. To add drama and anticipation into the significance of this letter, Bernie piqued my curiosity by suggesting this was no ordinary just keeping in touch, how's the family doing kind of letter. The content matter and subject was quite the revelation, profoundly affecting the lives of the Vaniers, and quite possibly even me. Well, now I was home, alone, as Bernie was still at work, so I had the letter to myself. I removed it from the torn envelope and casually unfolded it. ... Dear Bernie, Albert, and family, hope this letter finds all of you in good health and doing fine. Sorry it's been so long in my writing to you and the family. After Thanksgiving, things just seemed to happen so quickly that the time flew by, from months into years, without my realizing it. I had to wonder at the time if that reference to Thanksgiving was a veiled suggestion as to the importance of whatever information this letter, obviously written by Jackie, contained. I continued reading. How have you and the family been keeping? Is Al still traveling all across the country? I hope all the kids graduated and are moving up to the next grade. Is Andrea going to go to college? How's that job of yours going? I hope it won't take up too much of your time, keeping you from attending those night classes you spoke to me about. Bernie wants to take some night classes? That's news to me. I felt a little peeved that I had to hear this news from someone else, in a letter to boot. Obviously, Bernie will be anticipating a reaction from me when she gets home. And then again, friends will confide in friends, even before their own spouses in certain matters. But still. Anyway, I read on while at the same time wondering what courses she would have been interested in. I gave cursory attention to the customary weather, work, and other trivial related matters found on the first few pages of Jackie's letter. Nothing mentioned about the modules, further alien encounters, or mysterious side effects. I found the absence of the aforementioned details rather curious. Whatever curiosity I may have felt was soon replaced by feelings of vindication, exultation, and of course a subdued sense of empathy for the Vaniers. Why, I asked myself? Sean Vanier was finally going to pay for his miscreant behavior over these past several years, and all the grief he subjected his family to.
I found these results.
Oh, excuse me. You got to really hate these phones that eavesdrop in on you and they just start talking to you. Contrivances of the devil. Anyways. Okay, where was I? And of course, that little episode almost 3 years ago with the boys in his car after he had been drinking. It seems his drinking and rowdy behavior finally caught up to him. According to her letter last year around Thanksgiving, he had gotten into a real brawl at some hotel in Sudbury. In the fight that ensued, he caused a lot of damage and even sent one of his assailants to the hospital. Because he hadn't initiated the fight, his assailants made some disparaging reference to his diminutive stature. He had merely ended it. The charges against him weren't as severe as they could have been. Unfortunately, because of his previous brushes with the law, he could expect no leniency from the judge, whom, incidentally, he had come before on another occasion. Not a lot of judges to choose from in a small city like Sudbury. Because the judge determined Sean's life was redeemable, all what he needed, the judge suggested, was strong discipline and guidance in the right direction. So the judge gave him an alternative to serving time in jail. Sean could enlist in the armed forces for a full term. In the letter, Jackie thinks it's for 5 years, or spend serious time, sooner or later, in prison. Jackie went on to describe how she and Bill openly wept in court, partially because they both felt ashamed of their failure in raising their son, and optimism at the prospect that Sean might now get the support they couldn't seem to provide. Needless to say, Sean chose wisely. For that I was glad. I held no animosity towards Sean, but I was still angry about that incident 2.5 years ago. Then again, I've been accused of doing some irresponsible things as well, so I can't be too harsh on Sean. I'll keep those skeletons buried for now. At least now Sean has an opportunity for some genuine rehabilitation and to make his parents proud. After all, isn't that what all parents really want for their kids? After having finished reading the letter, I proceeded to my desk in the master bedroom and switched on the computer. Once all the programs were loaded, I selected the email icon, found the Vaniers address, and began writing a letter to them. Wow, talk about deja vu, all over again. My next chapter will elaborate on that period when I returned home and the Thanksgiving dinner we celebrated with the Vaniers that October. Come to think of it, I'm beginning to recall it was also during that period I stumbled on the extraordinary latent powers of the modules. Inadvertently, of course. Oh my God, now I remember. It was in the garage at home before we went to the Vaniers. That's where it all began. That's how we got here. Computer off. Okay. Which computer am I on now? Anyways, that concludes the reading of chapter 17. Next week will be Mere Coincidence or Divine Providence, chapter 18. And look, both end one page or next page. You only have to use one bookmark this particular time. I hope you enjoyed this week's book reading. I'll get back to you hopefully next week. I will show some pictures of my church's ceremony there as consecration. But until then, have a wonderful week. And remember, read a book.